Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. This is the third part of my conversation with Dr. Miriam Schoenfeld, who is a professor of philosophy at UT Austin and teaches a course called Who Am I? In this conversation, I asked Miriam, what do you think is your self? How did you become interested in the question of the self? I share my lifelong journey of questioning the self that led to non-duality. Then we compare our perspectives on the self, subjective versus objective facts, dream versus reality, and the continuity of the self over time. Okay, so we're gonna sort of just get right into it.
Great.
So right as we're sitting here in this room and we're having this conversation now, in this moment, what do you think is the self? Or is that who's having this conversation?
Ooh, that's a hard question.
Yeah. So at the moment, let's forget about all the theories that you teach and other people's ideas. I'm just trying to get straight at what is your belief about what the self is, like yourself. Yeah.
I see. It's very hard for me to not start thinking about all the theories when you ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess when I'm not being theoretical about it, then my sort of day-to-day conception of the self is the intuitive conception of the self is something like some sort of mental mind that lives inside my head and has experiences of the world and makes decisions, kind of like a homunculus almost.
Yeah.
I don't think I endorse that as the correct view, but that's how it feels like.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons that I wanted to start with that question and not the theories is it feels like when people talk about the self, it's such an elusive thing actually that you very easily get kind of veiled by ideas and things, and then you start talking about that. But really, I think the self is a more immediate thing. You gotta keep cutting through all the web of thoughts. Okay, who's thinking that right now?
Yeah.
Who is thinking about the theory of the self?
Yeah.
So are you actually interested in the self, or you just teach a course?
I'm interested in it.
Yeah. How did you become interested?
That's a great question. I think I became interested when I started listening to some of Alan Watts's lectures, where he was giving arguments for the self as being identical to the universe. So it's I am the universe. And before I'd listened to that, if someone had put that idea before me, I would have thought, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. But he had these really compelling, I don't know if I want to say exactly arguments, but considerations. The lectures were very compelling. And I just noticed that as I was listening more and more, I started kind of feeling myself adopting that perspective, kind of trying it on for size, And it was so thrilling and intriguing. And I was kind of whoa.
The more you get into that perspective, the more you can't back out.
The more you can't back out. Yeah.
There's something a little bit irreversible that happens when you get into it.
Yeah, it's kind of seductive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's sounds true.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Actually, I think the name of the recording company that records his lecture is called Sounds True.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the pun?
I guess that's the pun. I didn't know that you knew that. But I was that's kind of an interesting name for this publication company, because it does kind of highlight how some of these wisdom things are not, when you hear them, it's not oh yeah, I see how it logically connects to whatever. It's just the impact of it is that kind of sounds true.
Yes, exactly.
So it's almost rather than an analytical derivation, it's like a remembering.
Yes.
It's like, wait, that kind of sounds true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, you said that before you had kind of familiarized yourself with Alan Watts' stuff, if someone had said that idea, you would be like, oh, that's bonkers.
Yeah.
The reason I say that's funny is because I wasn't sure that if you had heard of the idea of non-duality, because I've seen people in the West who work on things like the self who haven't actually encountered what is mostly an Eastern idea about non-duality. So I was here to come also and like talk a little bit about the perspective about this non-dual perspective of the self that I've come across. Yeah. And I was like, well, what is that conversation going to be like? Is it going to be like completely new and you're going to be like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Or, okay, so I'm kind of glad that, you know.
Yeah. My students are going to be listening to that Alan Watts stuff next week, actually.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. So my personal thing with, I feel like I've had like sort of a lifelong journey about the self. And I just want to like spend a couple of minutes like explaining where I'm coming from. I think I've had like weird dissociative experiences a couple of times in my life. And saying dissociative is like one of the ways of putting it. I guess that would be the word that Western psychology would use. But in a lot of Eastern traditions, it's not just seen as like a dissociation. The word seems like it's failing of some kind of a normal way of functioning, where I think a lot of Western psychology is founds itself on the pillar of the self. So if the self disappears, like, oh, shit's not working. But in Eastern philosophy, it's not actually seen as a transcendental experience, which you actually get a little bit closer to the truth of reality.
Yes, absolutely.
And the self is kind of seen as an illusion. So anyway, so I had some dissociative experiences, sort of against my will, like it just happened to me. Like I used to get visions in my mid-teens. I would get involuntary visions of what would happen after I die, and basically it was different visualizations of my separate self and identity dissolving into a whole.
Wow.
And it's like some people call that like union with God or whatever. I wanted none of it. I was an atheist, and I was like, I actually want to stay encapsulated within myself forever, but these visions would like really kind of blur the boundaries between me and whatever is beyond me, and I did not like that at all. It was like I grew up with like a gripping fear of death, and so the fear of death was synonymous with the fear of the dissolution of identity. And sometimes it would be triggered by like different things, like me looking at myself in the mirror. A lot of the time would be like, oh shit, here it comes, who is that? And then it's like, it's, you know, and so the question of who am I and what is going to happen at death were somehow the same question in my head. Because it was all about who am I is like drawing the boundary between what is me and what is not. And my death is the same question of what is dying. Is there an inside and outside, and the inside is going to the outside, or what is dying exactly? What is it that you are that is dying? You know? And I did not want to go down that path, but my mind would. And it kind of would feel like a lot of information is coming out of somewhere into my mind, that it was like a tornado of like truth that I did not want to be in. So that was like one example of like this dissociative or whatever, you know, these experiences. But then the question of what is the self like kept on like in my mind. It's not in a narcissistic way, you know, who am I, whatever. It's almost like the opposite. It's like questioning what the self even is. Then at some point I did some psychedelics, and I also encountered non-duality. And same shit happened, where in the beginning I was like, what's it? Is this like word salad? What is this? What? But then it kind of had the effect of how, you know, an insect sees a candle and starts going towards the flame and is eventually extinguished by the flame and disappears. I kind of felt like an insect going towards the flame. And the more I went in, the more I was like, oh yeah, that's totally true. That's totally obviously true. But there is still a self saying that. So it's still like a conceptual mind that still subjectively feels like I'm running the body, making decisions, and there is no self. So it's not completely no self.
Yeah.
There's like enough of a self left who's like intellectually, I totally get that,
Yeah.
that there's no self. So, but there is a self.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just kind of like my background.
Yeah. Wow. What a story.
Yeah, where I am right now.
Yeah.
But also my fears about death have like really reduced a lot. So I feel like more and more, what was like a deathly fear to me is questioning the boundary of the self has become more of like, yeah, I'm chill with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm chill with like probing that and questioning that more and watching it dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in psychedelic states, the self will actually like kind of like physically dissolve, but then it comes back.
Yeah.
But in those experiences, I've been like more okay with it. Mm-hmm. And my general perspective is that it's not like anything new is happening. Mm-hmm. Like there is actually already no self, but sometimes it's just revealed.
Yes.
So I need not freak out because all the time actually there's no self.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are you in relation to that perspective?
Let's see. So, I can say some things about that. So one of the things that I do find very compelling about that perspective. I guess there's two things. One is like we've been talking about a little bit. Sometimes you kind of, it just like sounds true, or you feel it on an experiential level or something like that. But when I have thought about it more analytically, some of the arguments that kind of move me in that direction have to do with the lack of physical boundaries between bodies and non-bodies. So if I think about my body, for example, there is no sharp line between like which particles are part of my body and which are not. And you see that all over, like it's true all over the body. So if you think about my skin, there's like little electrons that haven't decided whether to be part of me or not.
Yeah.
You think about breath, air that's coming in and out. Is the air part of me once it's inside, not part of me once it's outside? And I think some people think that that's one reason why meditation focuses a lot on the breath, is because the breath has this in-between quality of like, it's out, then it's in, then it's out. Like it kind of blurs the boundary. And I often sometimes find it most vivid when it comes to food. Like, here's a piece of food that's sitting on a table, definitely not me.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it is.
Yeah.
And that's not just for people, right? For chairs, any object you see has blurry boundaries.
Yeah.
So insofar as, like, if I were to think of myself as a body, I would say there are no sharp lines between this body and the rest of the universe. And so that sometimes like kind of gets me in the mood to thinking like, actually, even on a, like, if you were really just like being hardcore sort of physicalist about the whole thing, you can't find these sharp boundaries in the physical world.
Yeah.
The thing that kind of bugs me / fascinates me, though, is that it does seem to me like there are sharp boundaries in the mental world. So, like, there are certain particles where I think it's not clear whether they're part of me or not, but there's no, like, thought or pain that I experience where I'm like, oh, maybe that's Neil's, maybe that's mine. It's kind of in between. It seems like our mental lives have like these, like a cage around them. Like these ones are mine, these ones are yours.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to think of how there could be indeterminacy or blurriness in boundaries between different people's experience. And so that's something that's really puzzled me. Because like insofar as I get swept away by that view, I also have the sense that, there are these sharp lines in the mental realm.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll say one other thing that has sort of bugged me about like the non-duality view, or the idea that there's just one thing, the universe. There are cases that get talked about sometimes in philosophy and epistemology in particular, where you have ignorance about who you are. So like one example would be, this is just like kind of sci-fi-ish example, but like you find out that you've got what's called a qualitative duplicate. So like someone that looks like you, has exactly the same thoughts as you, but like a distinct body. So like a clone of you, yeah? And you were each like kidnapped or something and put into these identical rooms, and then you both wake up, and then you both hear like a loudspeaker come and say something like, one of you is in a room that's near a lake, and one of you is in a room that's in front of a mountain. Yeah? And it seems like I can ask myself the question, am I the one by the lake?
Yeah.
But if you get rid of the self-facts, there's no way to formulate the question. Because I can't say like, is the person wearing the white shirt the one by the lake? Because my clone is also wearing a white shirt.
Oh, yeah. You're saying that the only way to ask that question is from the perspective of the people waking up. But if you are taking an outsider's perspective of these two clones, there's no way to even formulate who's where.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Which means that the clones, like if I am one of the clones, the only way I can formulate the question is by appeal to using self-language. Yeah. And yet it seems to me like for sure there's a coherent question. For sure there's a fact of the matter about whether I am by the lake or not. Yeah. And but if you fully take on this no self view, I think you can't, the question doesn't make sense. Yeah. So that's my other like gripping point, where I feel like, well, that question really does seem like it makes sense to me, but the no self view doesn't allow for that question to make sense.
The question makes sense to one self, but not the other. The observer self or the experimenter self, it makes.
Well, I think the question makes sense from the perspective of one of the clones.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that some questions can make sense from some perspectives, but not others. So I don't really know what the contradiction is here.
I guess when I think about, suppose we take it for granted that the question does make sense from the perspective of the clone. Yeah. So what I want to say is that means that there is something that the clone is uncertain about. Yeah. And what that means is they're uncertain about the world being one way or the world being another way.
Yeah, but not an objective quality of the world. And objective qualities, questions about objective, quote unquote, are the ones that translate like it should make the same sense no matter who's asking. Yeah. But what this kind of reminds me of, I mean, this is, granted, I've never actually thought about this before. Yeah. But what this reminds me of is like some other stuff, like, for example, in neuroscience and whatever, or AI, we're starting to get closer and closer to thinking about what is artificial general purpose intelligence, is this thing conscious, blah, blah, blah. And that's one of those questions where you're like, is this thing conscious? Is a question that you can never really answer from the outside. Like, what test can you do to know if a robot is conscious? The test of consciousness is being inside. It's like, hey, I'm here. I am conscious. But if you're outside, there's nothing you can do from the observer's perspective to have an answer to that question. So I feel like the reason I'm connecting these two dots is like what we're talking about is the subjective perspective is something that only manifests if you are experiencing it from that perspective. That's the only thing that it's about. So if you remove that, then it's like you remove the whole thing that you're like talking about. So there's no like objective tests to know whether a robot is conscious, because you have to inherit its perspective and like, okay, the lights are on, I am actually aware. So in your question like this, like you would actually have to be inside one of those clones looking outside in order for that self-reference to have any meaning and to say, am I, by the lake or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I can sort of say that back to you. So you're saying there's no test you can do from the outside to determine with certainty whether something else is conscious.
Yeah.
And what do you take that to show?
I'm just saying that talking about consciousness, or let's say in this case, self-consciousness, being aware that I'm here and whatever, is something where the core of that idea of being conscious or self-conscious is being it. That's what the core of it is. So if you're not being it, a lot of things are no longer going to make sense. Like, for example, yes, I'm conscious or not conscious is something that you can only ask from a first-person perspective. So if your answer is yes, I'm conscious, from the outside, there's no way for me to know if you are some kind of like a zombie, like without any lights on inside. So suddenly, just because I've changed my perspective, there's no way to settle the question, but for you, there is a way to settle the question. We'll assume you're like, okay, I'm conscious.
Yeah.
So in that same way, what I'm saying is that if you wake up as one of those clones, this question makes sense because you're able to refer to yourself only because you are that self.
Yeah.
So you know what to refer to.
Yeah.
But if you're not that self, it's about self-reference, right? Yeah. It's not about reference to something out there in the world. So the experimenter can only refer to subject 1 or subject 2, but only the clones can refer to themselves. So this thing called the self is an anchor point from the perspective of the experience of each self, but not from the perspective of an outsider. So that anchor point that they're asking that question about only makes sense from that perspective. And there exist things like that in the world, which only make sense or exist from certain perspectives.
Yeah, okay. So a couple of thoughts about that. So one is, I want to distinguish between things that you cannot know about unless you occupy a certain perspective versus what I would say distinctions that only make sense from a certain perspective. So I think I can't know for certain whether you're conscious, but I still think there is a fact of the matter about whether you're conscious, even if I don't know about it.
Oh yeah, I don't completely believe that.
Oh, you don't think there's a fact of the matter about whether someone else is conscious?
No.
Why?
I think because consciousness is subjective, so it doesn't make any sense to ask that question. No matter what way I have an answer, I wouldn't know for sure.
Well, but yeah, that's the distinction I'm trying to draw. I'm trying to think there are things that we might never know for sure.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there's no fact of the matter.
I think that's where our perspectives differ.
I see. What about something like the number of stars? Like maybe we'll never know for sure what the number of stars are, but do you think there's a fact about how many stars there are?
Maybe. I think that's kind of an imagination.
I see.
Yeah. I think maybe I used to have a more objective perspective into the world previously. But now more and more I see that the only quote unquote facts of the matter is just what conscious experience is happening. And any inferences about the nature of the world behind it, or whatever's going on behind my eyes right now, or there's this physical world which projects images into our mind. That's what material science is about. It's like we just see like a shadow. What's the world really like out there? All of those are like, for me, like now just imaginations. So there's no fact of the matter here for me.
So yeah, there's two ways of interpreting. They're just imaginations. So one is a kind of skepticism in the sense of I don't really trust whatever inferences are being made that aren't the things that are in my direct experience. Yeah.
I'm not saying that the real world could actually be different from what we believe. I'm saying that there's no point in talking about it.
You're saying, but I guess what I'm saying is there are different reasons why there might be no point. One reason there might be no point is because we can't know about it. Another reason there might be no point, and it sounds like maybe this is where you're going, is that there actually is no fact of the matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever we talk about when we're talking about are like words connected to symbols in our mind. Yeah. So what we're actually talking about is we're referring to thoughts arising in the mind. When we say the number of stars out there.
I see.
Or when I say whether you're conscious or not, that's just a thought consideration in my mind.
So what are there facts about?
I feel like if you were talking about facts, I don't know what facts mean, but I would say, if you ask me what is real, I would just say whatever is undeniably arising in this moment, like the sound of my voice and this picture, but also there is nothing that's unreal. So all of the stuff that we're talking about, these facts, they arise as thoughts. And there are patterns in the world which allow us to do objective science, meaning that one person measures something over here, another person measures the same thing, gets the same answer. Those patterns happen to be true. And so a story can be made of things called facts that underlie the projection of the world. And it ends up being kind of coherent, but that's just how things are. It could change any moment. So I feel like I am a very minimalist when it comes to believing what's happening.
I'm still like, some of the things you're saying like sound to me more like what in epistemology we call skepticism.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I don't really have beliefs about things that are happening outside.
Yeah. I think that's also true.
That's also true.
Yeah. I should also just say that this thing called knowledge, of I know what the world is, for a long time I believed, I know a great deal because I've had this education in physics and whatever. I don't actually even believe in knowledge anymore. Like, I think knowledge is one of the things that separates the subject and the object. I know about the world, but I think it's all just one soup, and knowledge is also arising in the form of thoughts, and it's just kind of just doing its thing.
Right. Okay, so that also sounds a little bit like what in epistemology we would call skepticism. So skeptics' official position is there's no knowledge, or there's no knowledge about a certain domain. Or another version of it is there's no justification for believing things, or there's no justification for believing things about a certain domain. But then there's the what we would in philosophy describe as like a metaphysical question about, forget about what we do and don't know, what we can and can't know, what are there facts of the matter about? Right? So you might say, so this isn't your view, but someone might say, look, I think there's a fact of the matter about how many stars there are, but maybe no one will ever know about it. But I don't think there's a fact of the matter about whether this chair is to the right of me or to the left of me, because that's an inherently perspectival question, right? It's to the right of me relative to me, and it's to the left of me relative to you. So like we can distinguish like sentences that are such that there's some fact in the world that grounds the truth or falsity, whether we can know it or not, versus ones that actually there's nothing about the world that would decide the matter. This definition that you just gave, I would say it seems like what you're talking about are objective facts versus subjective facts. What you're talking about, facts are where people to decide, they would like, that would be the one thing that's true for everyone. There would be a certain number of stars that's true for every person, but seat is to the right or the left would depend on whatever consciousness you're inhabiting. So I just don't think that there is anything objective. Okay, you don't think there are any objective facts? No. Okay, interesting. I think this idea of objective is something that we have cooked up. I'm not saying that it's all wrong. I'm just saying that it happens to work. But it is a mental construct. It is an imagination. In the way that I would say, right now, if you think, what is the shape of the earth? What is the shape of the earth? Round. Okay, that's an imagination. Right now, in the moment when you say the shape of the earth, it's not something that you're experiencing right now. You're just experiencing this room, talking to me, play of light and color, thoughts, associations. But there is a widely held belief and blah, blah. So I'm saying all of those facts of the matter are like that. In the moment, their only existence is the arising as thoughts in the mind, connected to other thoughts that we have experienced in the company of apparently other conscious humans. Apparently. Is it an objective fact that thoughts exist? I don't know, because I don't
know if you have thoughts?
No, just not any particular person's thoughts, but just that there exist thoughts.
If I don't even know if anyone else is conscious, then the question reduces to, do I have thoughts?
Yeah.
That's no longer an objective question. That's just about me.
Well, you can ask the question in an objective way, like, you might think, like, whether you have shoes, for example.
Yeah.
That's not really a question about, like.
Yeah, but
we might say that's an objective question, whether you have shoes. And
it's
similarly,
a little bit different talking about thoughts than shoes, because you and I can more or less agree on what are shoes. But what you're calling thoughts, I don't no longer know, because I don't even know if you're conscious. So I have a certain thing that I call thoughts, and those exist, but I don't even know if that's what you're talking about.
Okay, so you have a thing that you call thoughts, and those exist.
Yeah, they're like words or sayings inside my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, and they exist right now at this time.
Yes, I heard my voice say yes, so yeah.
Yes, okay.
That's one of his thoughts, yeah.
Now, do you now think that if in 5 minutes from now, you were to deny the existence of having had thoughts 5 minutes before, you would be wrong?
I don't know why I would do that, but if myself...
Suppose you have amnesia or something.
Okay, so here's something else. It's about time.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm making a certain statement, in this moment, this is all of reality. And if 5 minutes later, there are no thoughts, and I don't have any memory of ever having had any thought before, and I say, no, there are no thoughts, then that would be true.
That would be true.
Yeah, it would be true from the perspective of me in 5 minutes and now. So all I'm saying is that what is truth is subjective.
I see. Yeah.
So I don't believe in objective truths.
Yeah.
So they would both be true. And them both being true is only a problem in the objective imagination of the world, where it has to agree. But I'm saying it doesn't have to agree.
Right. Yeah. I guess this is just probably like the rock bottom disagreement between us.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine thinking to myself the following, like, right now I'm conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And if in 5 minutes from now I deny that, I won't be making a mistake. Because insofar as I'm now, like, so convinced that I'm conscious, I think, well, if 5 minutes from now, like, something happens, I get amnesia or whatever, and I start saying, oh, I just came into existence,
what if
I would
happens?
be wrong. What's that?
Well, you would be wrong.
I would be making a factual error, because in fact I did exist before. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when we try to put both of those claims on the same plane, where it's relating to the same reality, one of them has to be true, the other has to be false.
Yeah.
But they're different realities, because they were realities of two different selves. So I think talking about reality is kind of weird from these two different perspectives. But it's kind of coincidental. I'll tell you a little incident that happened last night, which kind of verges on some of these things that we're talking about, which is I've recently had an idea about the continuity of the self over time, which in my mind, the way that I could explain it to myself is by drawing some diagrams. Yeah. But I never actually explained it to a person before, but I tried to explain it. I was extremely high. I was trying to explain this to my roommate, drawing these diagrams, and I think she got it, but this was also the first time that I explained it to someone, so it was kind of like okay. So the idea is that normally I think we believe that there's a certain linear continuity of us over time. So right now I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of my different versions of selves going back into the past, like 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, 5 years ago. And then maybe my imaginations of who I will be in 5 years, 10 years, etc. And then there's me right now. So if you join all of those dots, you get like a line, and you could call that, this is the line of time through which I continue as a self. But the inherent assumption there, if you put all of those dots on the same line, is that those dots all are coherently do form the same line. In other words, the dot that represents me 5 minutes ago I'm using that dot to represent two things, actually. The self that I actually was 5 minutes ago, and my imagination of who I was 5 minutes ago, thinking about it right now. Those two selves are actually different. One is an imagination, the other was an actual whatever in that moment. And when I think about myself from 10 years ago, it's actually distorted. Everyone's memory of who they were in the past is incomplete and distorted. So in the space of different selves or whatever, those two are actually two distinct points. Who I actually was 5 minutes ago and who I think I was 5 minutes ago, like right now. So it's not actually like a single line, but the mind wants to collapse all of those things into the same line because it wants to believe in a single continuity of the self. But truly, from every point in the course of your life where you've been a self, there stretches one line of your memory selves, and the other is your future projection of selves. From every point where you've actually been a self, there was a different curve of your continuity, and they don't intersect. So there's actually like a web of selves, which include all of the selves that you have actually been in that moment, and that information is only recoverable in that moment. And then everything else is just your projection or imagination of who you have been in the past and will be in the future. So if there have been n points of time, then for every point of time, let's say you have n points from that point thinking about who else you have been, there are actually n squared selves. Not n selves. But if you try to collapse them all onto one line, then it creates this kind of fake sense of continuity.
But it sounds like you were saying that when you were saying like we have distorted views of ourselves in the past, that makes it sound like there is a fact about what I was like in the past, and now I can have an accurate or distorted view of it. Yeah.
I'm just saying there's a difference between the actually being a self at a certain point of time and then the imagination of it later. They're actually completely different.
Right.
The one is a being, the other is a thinking. So they're apples and oranges. One is an imagination, the other is an actual perspective.
Right. But I guess I thought that on your view, there is no fact about whether you existed 5 minutes ago, or there is nothing to distort because there's no fact of the matter about what happened 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I would just say at this moment, if I refer to myself from 5 minutes ago, that's just an imagination. Yeah.
But is it the kind of thing that can be distorted or accurate?
I think it's not even a distortion really. Like if you think about drawing a picture of something, the picture is qualitatively different from the thing itself. So they're two completely different things. One is like an actual perspective, like whatever consciousness is, I don't know what that is, like the quality of being in a moment. And the other is an imagination, which is just a part of everything that you're experiencing right now. So in this moment, you're experiencing all of your physical sensations, the picture in front of you, the sounds, and a cluster of thoughts that represent who you think you were 5 minutes ago.
Right.
But that's just a subset of your conscious experience. Maybe 10% of your conscious experience is just thoughts. But who you were 5 minutes ago was all. It wasn't a thought. So those two things are completely different. One is just a cluster of thoughts. The other is everything that was happening 5 minutes ago.
Right. But like you're saying, like what thoughts do is they represent the way the world was, or they're not at all similar to the way the world was. They're just representations of it. So just like a map is nothing like a road. It represents the road, and then we can talk about a map being accurate or inaccurate, even though there's no similarity at all between like a map and a road or a map and a city. So similarly, you might think we can talk about whether your thoughts about the past are accurate or inaccurate, even though they have nothing in common with that.
I agree. I think you can kind of talk about the accuracy, and that's what I meant when I said, I had some idea of the accuracy when I was saying that it's kind of distorted. I feel like it does distort over time. Like if I think about who I was 10 years ago, I have a certain thing I could write down, but
Yeah.
then if I actually read my journals, let's say from 10 years ago, I could say, oh, this is like a really distorted view of who I was. So you can talk about the accuracy versus inaccuracy, but I think it's trickier to talk about the accuracy of this mental maps of the self, which are trickier than talking about the accuracy of a map representing a road.
Mm-hmm.
Because once again, that's like a thing that's out there in the world, and you can trust different people's like, oh, I followed the map and it led me to a pool, so that can't be right. But when you just talk about like your self, it's like it's that subjective thing comes in, so it's just harder to keep checking it against facts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like extra tricky, I think, to talk about these accuracies or inaccuracies.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you're calling the fact of the matter, is the road really there or not? You can kind of talk about it when it comes to the road, but are you really that or not is like more difficult to talk about.
Yeah, so there is a view in philosophy and philosophy of science in particular, called verificationism, which says that the only real facts or objective facts that there are the ones that can be verified by independent sources.
I see.
And it sounds like that's kind of something that maybe you have some sympathy towards, because
some sympathy towards.
Yeah.
But I'm like quite opposed to, like, my perspective, as you can probably understand, is very much opposite to that.
Well, it's very interesting because like the verificationists are often associated with these kind of like sort of reductionist scientific views. And that's not your view.
I really flipped 180 on that in the course of my life.
Yeah.
I used to definitely be more of like, oh, just those objective facts and things like that.
Yeah.
And now I think, I don't know what the word for the opposite is, but sort of a solipsist, that's not a very good thing to say. But like kind of like, it kind of feels like whatever is happening is like more dreamlike.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're in a dream, how do you know that you're not dreaming right now?
Yeah.
A lot of these things that you're talking about, what are the facts of the matter, blah, blah, blah. All of these things that just become nonsense when it's a dream. Like other beings appear to you in their dream. Are you sure they're real? They have a conscious existence? Do they have thoughts? Can you settle with all of your dream buddies that there exist thoughts? What is the meaning of that question?
Well, I think there are such facts, like the creatures in my dreams don't have thoughts because they don't exist.
But that's only because we're talking about things that you like. Right now, we're talking about something that right now. We're talking about dreaming.
Yeah.
But when you're dreaming, you don't know that you're dreaming. You can have this conversation with how do you know that I'm not a dream creature?
I don't, which is why I think we can have false beliefs. So that's why I always want to be coming back to like, there's what we can be right, like what we can know and be sure about, and then there's what are their genuine questions about.
Yeah. So a lot of what I'm talking about might be mapped onto the question of, is this a dream or not?
Yeah.
Like, if this is a dream, then there's no point in me trying to decide if all of us humans have thoughts. What experiment could I do in this dream that will tell me, whatever conclusion I arrive at, then I wake up and I'm like, well, all of that was false. So I'm saying there's nothing I can do to tell whether this is a dream or not.
Right.
Which is synonymous to saying, like, I don't care. I don't think there are any facts of the matter like that.
Okay. I still deny that that's synonymous. I think those are two separate things, but maybe you think both things. Because the dream
linked.
Question is, the dream question has to do with like what you can know. And then there's a question of like, regardless of what I can know, what is the world like, or what facts are there? And you might think, though, like you're saying they're linked, is like, if I really thought that I couldn't know very much, for example, I thought maybe this was all a dream, I wouldn't maybe be very motivated to sort of try and inquire into what the world was like, because like the structure of the world within a dream doesn't have it's not very stable.
The structure of whatever dream this is seems stable enough for me to want to do science and get some gratification out of pattern recognition. So even though this is a dream, I still feel motivated. Also, I don't make up my motivations. Motivations just arise and I follow them.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Are we about like?
We've got 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This kind of does feel like a topic that we could have like gone on for like longer. Yeah. And I also feel, I feel kind of bad that I feel like I kind of dominated a lot of the conversation.
Well, but it's your podcast. You can do whatever you want.
yeah. But I just feel like this is a topic in which I have a lot of like stored energy.
Yeah.
So just like a lot of it's like blah 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 blah. This is just what I believe, and also I don't want to come across. I feel like sometimes when I talk about this thing, it just comes across with like a lot of force. It's like, oh, this is just what I believe, and I think it's just like this is true and whatever. So I just like hope you don't mind that like it just sometimes I'm like, oh, this is where I'm planting a flag in my
No, absolutely. That's what we do all the time in philosophy. So that's totally that's great.
Okay. Well, we don't have to like talk about anything more to just fill up the 5 minutes.
Okay.
But
great.
but if there was a longer conversation, what I would have liked to know about is I started with just your personal perspective on this topic.
Yeah.
But I would have liked to ask and learn more about what are these theories that you talk about in class? What have people, theorized and things like that about the self? But I didn't want to start with those because that's a little less interesting to me.
Yeah.
The self for me is like this very immediate experience.
Right.
So I just wanted to come to the immediacy of it.
Right.
Rather than talk about what this person said and that person said. Kind of feels like we get a little bit, actually, I get a little bit distant from it by all this web of thoughts.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for hanging with us in the Room of Lives. Although I can never know if you are a real conscious human being who actually experienced listening to my podcast. So take care if that's possible. Until next time.